Welcome to Mets Hot Stove with your hosts, Rob and CP, the go-to podcast for all your New York Mets news and rumors.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome to the first episode of Mets Hot Stove right here on the channels. And we are back for some off-season talk all off-season long. Chris, how you been? Long time, buddy.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a long time. Honestly, taking a much necessary break from this organization and all the pain they put us through in this 2025 season. But you know what? We're back. And regardless of what happens this offseason, as we were just talking about before we went live, we'll have a lot to talk about. A lot of decision making needed from David Stearns. And we've already got some news to talk about with the coaching staff and also some targets that we're going to be talking about on your screen. So I'm excited. And it's good to see everyone in the chat as well.
Yeah, it's a big offseason for the New York Mets. Obviously, they didn't make the playoffs. 83 wins this year. They failed and choked down the stretch, and a lot of it was because of pitching, but early on it was because of the hitting. It was a whole everybody's to blame for a situation that happened for the Mets in 2025. But, with the uncertainty of a possible strike after the 2026 season, this is a very big offseason for the Mets and baseball in general. And we see the Dodgers mowing through the playoffs like, it's basically, they're basically, sleepwalking through the playoffs right now and waiting for the Mariners and the Blue Jays to figure out who they're going to play as Game 7 happens tonight. Baseball is in a bad situation right now, considering, with all the contracts that are going on, with the owners being pissed off at the players and the union. And it's going to be very interesting what baseball teams are going to do throughout the league this offseason. But when it comes to the New York Mets, they have a lot to do, right? We all know about all the free agencies in the bullpen. We know about Alonso and Diaz. We'll get into it a little bit later. And we also know how bad our starting pitching was. And of course, not the offseason really didn't technically get started yet. And we're hearing many rumors, not just one guy, but multiple reporters talking about the Mets being in on certain pitchers that we'll definitely get into, Chris. And I want to get your quick thoughts on just the entire baseball spectrum as you see the Dodgers mow through the playoffs and the possible strike after this season. What are your thoughts on that overall?
Yeah, it's going to be a weird time for baseball, and this whole CBA agreement, and it's kind of unfortunate because I do see a scenario where we're not going to have baseball when we should have baseball for at least a month plus of the season. We all know that both parties, in this negotiation or this upcoming negotiation, they're very hard headed, and they really want to get I guess the metrics of their argument, their side heard. But as baseball stands today, it's kind of I don't know. It's like the Dodgers took advantage at the perfect time and being really aggressive and getting the championships and team built for the longevity because if baseball imposes any sort of, I'm not saying they're going to, but I'm just saying if any sort of cap, right? That's going to hinder a lot of teams. It's going to hinder a team like the New York Mets to try to, I guess, catch up to what the Dodgers have already done. I'm not saying it's impossible, but of course, money helps and spending the money helps. And teams are just going to have to get that much smarter. So I don't know. I think that this is an offseason where teams, whether it's the Dodgers continuously adding on to their already existing team or the Mets trying to play catch up, anybody, right? Trying to get these deals done and in because the landscape of baseball just might look so much different next year from an actual roster construction standpoint with the monetary value that teams are going to have to work with. So Dodgers are doing great things right now. Their fan base is loving it. I'm sure if I was a Dodgers fan, I would love it too. They are just sleepwalking through these playoffs and they just look unbeatable. And they got hot at the right time. And no matter what happens in the regular season with the Dodgers and how shaky they look, you know that they're going to come prepared because they've built up their roster with a good blend of just star-studded talent, veteran presence, young, exciting talent as well. And they are going to come through for you, and their veterans will come through at the right time for them. So it sucks. I'm really hoping one of these AL teams can get it done. Whoever comes out of this Game 7. I think that's happening tonight, by the way, is it not?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. I guess I'll be rooting for the Mariners. I think that it would be cool to see them in the postseason or in the World Series. It's been cool to see them have this kind of run, but yeah, I just can't see either of those teams being the Dodgers, to be honest. But I think that the overall sentiment of starting off this stream talking about the upcoming negotiation between the owners and the players is important because this offseason is basically could be the last, I guess, I don't know, advantage to taking advantage for these teams like the Mets and these big market teams that are used to spending money but might have to think twice about doing so in the next coming years. So I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird time.
Yeah, very much a real time. And when it comes to the Mets, with all the work they have to do just to put up a team, uh, in 2026, they got a lot of moves they have to make. And they started with this offseason very early, firing coaches, firing the scapegoats, as we talked about on many shows. Those were the first line of defense to get the fans off of Stearns' back, and firing the hitting coaches, firing Hefner, and so on and so forth. And Carlos Mendoza was basically him and Richardson. Well, technically Richardson doesn't have a contract, but we'll see. But right now it's Mendoza as the big boys that is hanging around and basically going to get the brunt of it. And he's on a very, very hot seat going into next year. I give him about 50 games and he better perform well, or you're going to see one of our new coaches, Kai Correa, being the interim coach manager if that's the case. So when it comes to Kai Correa and Jeff Albert, obviously Jeff Albert, the hitting coach or player development hitting coach, whatever long title they gave him, he's basically the hitting coach. Chris, what are your thoughts on Kai Correa? He wasn't on my list, that's for sure. And Jeff Albert, I mean, another one that probably wasn't on the list either on my list. But what are your thoughts on Kai Correa? Obviously, he is basically, right beside Mendoza, who could be taking his job mid-season if things don't go right. What are your thoughts on those two guys?
Well, he did so when the Giants fired Gabe Kapler. I believe it was back in 2022 or 2023, one of those seasons. I think it was actually 23. And he was the interim coach over there. I didn't have him. I don't think many people really had him on any sort of list pertaining to the New York Mets, but it's going to be very interesting. It's actually just weird how the whole situation played out with the coaching staff in general, especially as it pertains to the bench coach, which is what Kai Correa is going to be, with John Gibbons. And basically the team not firing him, I guess giving him enough grace to just step down by himself. But, everyone knows, like, regardless if they come out and say it or not, that was definitely a firing. I mean, they just wanted a clean house.
Mm-hmm.
But, with Jeff Albert too, I'm just curious what the mindset is here in terms of the analytics, because there's a lot of people that are excited, but also the analytics are really said to be a driving point with these new coaches coming in, and that's all fine and great, but I just don't quite understand like where this team is headed in that sort of direction. I guess it's good to get youth on the bench too. I mean, Mendoza is a fairly young manager, I will say, right? Relatively speaking, around the league. Correa also, I don't even think he's 40 years old yet. Albert, I think he's mid 40s, something like that. So I guess it's good to get youthful, like in the dugout with the coaches, like we always talk about, in the field with the players. But it's just confusing. It's confusing, and it could be a blessing, it could be a curse, it could be a mix of both. I don't know, but clearly, like you said, they are shaping this up to be a coaching staff that is here for the long haul. And we won't see, I think, with these set of moves, like we won't see, regardless of what the outcome is, there's no more scapegoats at this point, especially under the watch of David Stearns. Like, you can't use the coaching staff again as a scapegoat if things don't go according to plan in 2026, 2027, and beyond. Like, this is pretty much it, I would say, for the foreseeable future. So they better have gotten it right, is all I'll say. And I think it's going to be a little bit longer until we get the Jeremy Hefner replacement from the pitching side of things. But
Yeah.
it's strange, but I'm going to reserve judgment and I'm going to withhold judgment until we actually see how this plays out. A lot of, I guess, hype surrounding Jeff Albert as well, who served as the Cardinals hitting coach. I think they had some pretty successful years out there at St. Louis under his watch, offensively speaking. And he was, I think, the director of hitting in the minor leagues across the whole spectrum of the Mets farm system. And they had a good offensive year. Let's not get that twisted. So, yeah, I don't know. I just don't know why they couldn't name him the hitting coach. That, like, as I'm talking, that's the biggest thing that's stumping me right now. Like, why do you need to give him another title? Not that it matters. Nobody should really care. But what's the difference in the title of what they gave him versus an actual hitting coach? It doesn't really make sense. But he will be in uniform. He will be on the bench, and so the players will be reporting to him from the offensive standpoint.
Yeah, I just don't get it. I really don't. When it comes to Jeff Albert, like I just like, is he a hitting coach? Is he? Look, I know in the minor leagues, and the Mets minor league numbers are really good offensively, but we know they hit in the minor leagues. Send Vientos down to the minor leagues, he can hit. Send Mauricio down, he can hit. Luisano Acuna, he can hit. Brett Beatty, he can hit. We all know these guys can hit minor league pitching. Like, that's not the issue. Can this guy get these guys to hit major league pitching? Because that would be the difference. Because when they come up, they suck. So he's clearly not doing something right. And this is what I don't understand. Like, I'm all for, having a guy have a job in the minors and being a manager, working through the system and, get up to the big league level. I'm all for that. Guys can be familiar with certain coaches and all that. That's great. But how has he been a successful hitting coach in the minors? Just because they hit in the minors, it seems like every prospect that is a position player or offensive player that comes up is not very good. And they have so many flaws that they get exposed and they're not good hitters. Like, it took Beatty 4 years to figure out how to hit. It took Vientos, God knows how many years, and it took him for Beatty to fail just to him to show up, and then he sucked this year. We all know about Mauricio, can't hit in a breaking ball. Luisano Acuna can't hit a broadside of a barn. Like, I just don't understand it. Like, there's got to be better people out there. The same thing goes for Kai Correa. Like, I know there's a lot of talk about him being, a very smart guy, a good baseball guy. But even the Giants, who seem like they want to hire anybody at this point, didn't leave him as the official manager when he was the interim manager. And he was already there. So I don't know. Like, we all know this is going to be way too analytical at this point. We think matchups are a pain in the ass now to talk about. Wait until the season starts. We'll be talking about that every day because that's all they're going to do analytically. They're going to do lefty, righty. They're going to righty, lefty. That's all they're going to talk about because that is exactly what they're putting. And what I don't like is the fact that you're leaving your manager out there to dry. Where's the relationship? Even when Mendoza came aboard, Mendoza didn't pick his guys. Mendoza talked about certain guys when he first got hired who he would like to see as his coaching staff. And it was everybody but who he said. And yet again, you leave Mendoza. I mean, you might as well just fire Mendoza at this point because you're leaving him with who does he trust? Who does he go to? You know what I'm saying? Like, can he have a conversation with Kai Correa, who's probably going to try to take his job? You know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't like that. I don't think it makes any sense. I think there's already a rift in this clubhouse and in this dugout. And now you're going to have the coaches who are not handpicked by Carlos Mendoza, which the normal thing to do is have a manager pick the guys. And even, we're not talking about the Yankees here, but even Yankee fans talk about how Brian Cashman hires all these other coaches that have nothing to do with Aaron Boone and have no relationship with him and don't let Aaron Boone pick them. And they just throw him into the dugout. Say, hey, here you go, guys. Go out to dinner. Bring your wives and have a good day, and we'll see how it goes. Like, I don't feel like that's a successful philosophy. Again, I could be totally wrong. I don't see it as a successful option. Like, does anybody feel good if Kai Correa jumps in as the interim manager within 60 games of the season and say, all right, we got our manager? No, because you know what? Even Terry Francona vouched for Mickey Callaway. How did that work out? So I don't really know, guys.
Rob, it's the first offseason. It's the first Hot Stove Live. It's the first Hot Stove Live. I love this comment from Dolph too. I was like, Rob form with
That's
these.
right, baby. That's right. Hey, listen. The emotions never stop, right? Look, I've done like 3 shows since the Mets lost game 162. I'm in rare form, right? I've been bottling all this up. I mean, just ask my coworkers that are Met fans. I don't shut up about it. So I just it is what it is. Like, I know people aren't gonna get mad about it right now because they don't, I'm sorry, the bench coach ain't gonna matter. I'm not saying these guys are gonna, like change the entire spectrum of this team, but we know this is all an analytical move. And everybody who was so goo goo gaga for the Milwaukee Brewers, they got embarrassed against the Dodgers, the best team in baseball. Couldn't get out of their own way when they were doing a bullpen game for their lives in the postseason. Like, this is a team that was the best team in baseball record-wise, and they got wiped off the floor by the Dodgers. Like, analytics are fine, but when you overuse it, I just don't think it works too much. You think the Dodgers are using analytics? No, they just buy everybody and trade for everybody. That's all they do. So, I'm not saying that's the only philosophy, but it seems to work for them, and we seem to shy away from it, unfortunately. And, this can't be another half-ass offseason. I'm sick of those, right? I don't care what anybody says when it comes to prospects. Like, there's one guy who's untouchable, in my opinion, at this point, and that's Nolan McLean. Like, I love Carson Bench. I like a couple other guys, but I'm not stopping a trade because of a certain prospect, not named Nolan McLean, to get this team better in 2026. You have to win. At some point, you have to go for it and win. And we will definitely get into that, Chris, but I don't know. It's going to be way too analytical for me, and maybe it works, maybe it won't. But, when I heard Kai Correa, I'm I had to do a little research on him. I didn't know, I knew he was the Giants interim, but other than that, I'm not excited about him. Just like Jeff Albert, I'm like, okay, you basically promoted them from the minor leagues, but none of these guys come up and hit. So how can I get excited about that?
Yeah, I think Correa also served as the Guardians infield coach in 2024, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe as it pertains to shoring up the defense, in the infield, which was a major problem for this Mets team all across the board, was the defense. And I think that's going to be a talking point. It should be a talking point all offseason long with what David Stern said in his intro press conference. But I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know where the decision-making process was. I kind of agree with you to a certain extent. Again, I'm going to withhold my complete judgment. I won't act like it's the end of the world, although Mendoza definitely is on notice. And I'm sure, I think that was the reporter, that he's getting put on notice to begin the 2026 season, because let's be honest, he had a great 2024 campaign. Most things went in his favor, and it was a successful season all in all. In 2025 was complete opposite. I mean, Mendoza had a lot of mistakes as a manager, especially in relation to, which was hard because, I mean, when you have to manage a bullpen after the starters don't give you length for pretty much the entire season, it wears down on you as a manager, but you're still expected, to find success with the talent that this team had. And it was a failure of a season all across the board. We all knew that Mendoza was coming back. Do I think that he's going to get let go after the first 50 games? I don't think so. I hope the Mets actually show up and, let this guy keep his job, because I do agree with you to a certain extent. Like, why don't you just let him, go out there and pick who he wants? You know what I mean? Is the reports of Correa being his guy? You know what I mean? I don't think Gibbons was his guy either. So that's the one piece of this that I definitely do agree with you, that it doesn't make sense in the actual philosophy and process, which makes it almost seem as if they are gearing up towards, these guys being here for the long haul, whether Mendoza's here or not. I think that they could view Mendoza as expendable, and maybe they're thinking about some guy already out there that's on the market. I can't give you any names. I have no idea, but they have this one candidate that they are eyeing. And they're just waiting to see if Mendoza gets the job done in 2026 or not. I don't know. It's weird how this whole process has gone, but I'm not going to pretend and sit here and pretend like, we know the ins and outs of the inside and what's going on in the conversations that are being had either. So let's talk about some needs in players, though, because I think that that's the most interesting part of this stream, or it should be at least. The coaching is the coaching.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like you said, Robin, you always say this, and this is spot on, is that no bench coach, right? John Gibbons wasn't why the Mets failed, right? Correa is not going to be the reason why the Mets fail in 2026 if they do either. It's going to be the talent that you acquire. And if you take a look at what the Dodgers have done, there's been a lot of, I guess, big brain moves by that front office, and with the trades that they have made, especially for like Glasnow, et cetera, when they made that trade. But they've had one philosophy, and it's an old school philosophy: acquire talent, the top talent in every single aspect of free agency across all positions, and go into the season prepared to win a title. And that's what they've done, and they are on the verge of winning their second straight title because of it. It's a simple philosophy. So all of this, brainiac David Stearns build a rotation, that is a bunch of no-namers, and we need a bounce back season from Montas, and because you believe he's one of the best pitchers in the league when healthy, like all this that we heard last offseason, all that, it doesn't play this offseason with how 2025 went. It doesn't. You follow the Dodgers philosophy. You want to be like the Dodgers? You want to model, the Dodgers way? Go out there and have an aggressive offseason. And I hope the Mets and David Stearns are preparing to do that. And I think that's the best way to introduce the players that are on our screen right now.
Exactly. And, to rank in our biggest needs, and I'm assuming a lot of people know our biggest needs, but to rank them really quickly before we get into the real thoughts of the players and our conversations with the players that are on our screens right now. I guess I'll go first when it comes to ranking. I said it yesterday on Mets Talk Live, so I'll go quick about it. An ace is number one. Number two, which is basically a 1A, is Edwin Diaz. And number three is, I put Pete Alonso as the 3, but only because I feel like Met fans will get mad at me if I say anything else but Pete Alonso. So that's where I'm just going to go there. Obviously, the Mets got to sign a bunch of bullpen arms because they decided to give all 1-year deals to people. And with Edwin Diaz probably opting out, they have no bullpen. So they got to do a lot of work with that. But I think that's my ranking for biggest needs is starting pitching ace, Edwin Diaz, and then Pete Alonso, just to make Met fans happy.
Yeah, I agree. I actually I think that's perfectly well said by you. And I think that the order definitely is to a T what it should be. I think it's not about Pete Alonso.
Yep.
It's not about Pete Alonso. It's
not this year.
Just not this year, but it's about a bat, right? Regardless if Pete stays or not, it doesn't matter. It's about which bat you're going to entrust in to, pair with Soto and Lindor. And there's multiple options that the Mets can go out there and explore if Pete Alonso remains firm on this 7-year deal that the Mets are definitely not going to give him. So, I don't think it's just about Pete Alonso. And I actually dropped a video about that, talking about a couple of options, one being a very obvious option in Kyle Schwarber. If the Phillies can't, retain him, they're going to try their hardest, according to Dave Dombrowski. But, there's different options. I don't think it just has to be about Pete Alonso. And I think Mets fans, there's certain signs that David Stearns has already shown us this offseason, even with his first press conference, to tell us, hey, listen, I'm not giving Pete Alonso 7 years. And the concerns mainly stem from his defense, Rob. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important to consider when we continue that Pete Alonso and this Pete Alonso discussion, the saga part 2, if you will, all off season long.
Yeah, so again, we kind of ranked it the same way, and we obviously know that Pete Alonso shouldn't be the main focus for this offseason because the Mets need so much more before they even think about Pete Alonso or a bat in general that they will get. It's just a matter of who that will be when we get later into this talk about more bats. So interesting to think that not too long into the playoffs, I mean, it was basically like a week after the season ended, we start, Andy Martino was the first to report about the Mets that Skubal could be available because the Tigers and Skubal are $250 million apart. And Andy Martino also said that the Mets are going to be very involved in, starting pitching on the market. And he brought up, and the name was Skubal. And everybody was like, oh, it's Andy Martino. Like, come on. Like, he kind of like throws these out there out of nowhere. Hopefully it sticks. But we know when Andy Martino says something positive about the Mets, listen a little bit. Because when he talks about the Mets in a negative undertone in his reports, he's just going after and just, sticking the knife in the Met fans just to poke them a little bit. That's what he usually does. But when he says something nice, you tend to listen a little bit because it seems to be right. And then not too long after Andy Martino's report, Will Simon came out a couple of days ago and said that the Mets seem like they're going to be all in, or at least, very focused on Tarik Skubal and other starting pitchers on the market. So when you heard that, and I know you might have tweeted something or you said something, I forgot which one. I think you tweeted something about, the Mets are not going to be, but that was a while back. Maybe a week and a half ago, maybe you said that tweet in regards to Skubal. But what are your thoughts on the possibility of the Mets being very much in on Tarik Skubal and that possible trade?
It's not happening. It's not happening. Zero is what it is. I and I was going to make a video about this, and I'm actually really mad that I didn't make the video because I didn't get around to it before this stream. But, I just do not see David Stearns making that kind of move. And if he does,
correct.
More power to him. More power to him. I just yes, this guy is probably going to win back-to-back Cy Youngs. This guy's posted an ERA under 3 for the past 3 seasons. This guy dominated the playoffs, right, in the short amount of appearances that he was able to take the mound for the Tigers this season in the playoffs. So he can pitch in big games.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's going to want $300+ million, 28 years old in the prime of his career, right? And if it's not 300, it's going to be damn near close to that over 8 years. You think that David Stearns wasn't willing to go, the contract value for Corbin Burns. Yeah, I understand that Skubal's younger, but he's not and $250 million is the number that I saw that Skubal is apart from the Tigers. That already gives you an indication that this is going to be well over $300 million. Do we think that David Stearns is handing out $300 million to any single player? So the Tigers are going to be wanting, right? If McClain is off I think that no matter who the Mets talk to, right? Of course, the Mets are going to inquire. They inquired with the White Sox about Crochet. The price was too high. They wanted, Spro and Jet Williams, and they weren't willing to do it back then, right? That's fine. Maybe the philosophy with David Stearns, and I know you shake your head because you were on that. You're like, you got to do it in an instant, in a heartbeat. And you know what? In hindsight, you were 100% correct. 100% correct. But, the Tigers are going to want a lot. I'm not even saying – I believe that – I don't even know if I want to go down this route again because I was proven wrong by David Stearns in believing that he will trade prospects to get acquired proven talent. But let's say the philosophy does change because we've been talking about this, and even during the season, I stated with you, and we both agree that the philosophical approach from David Stearns needs to change this offseason regarding the young talent in this farm system. And if you really win now, you have to be accepting of parting ways with that young talent. Even if the philosophy is, okay, we will give you the necessary prospects, I just don't think the Mets are going to be in on a guy like Skubal given the extension and what that would look like. And that's where I'm like, okay, let's pump the brakes on that. I'm even going as far right now in the early goings of this offseason to say that there's a 0% chance. Of course, I'd love to be wrong, but let's be realistic for 1 second. I think that there are a lot of other pitchers that are on the trade market, right? One in particular in Milwaukee that it's a better fit for what David Stearns has cooking up. So I don't see it, Rob. I'm sorry. And I know I did say that about a week and a half ago before, the Will Salmon, I guess, report, before anybody else, Martino talked about it, whatever. I did say it before that. I said, Mets fans, do not get your hopes up. This is not happening. And I still will stick by that to this very day on October 20th at 6 p.m. when we're doing this stream. The Mets are not getting Tarik Skubal. I'm not even getting my hopes up for it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think we would both do it. I just don't think David Stearns would do it. That's the problem.
Yeah, they want Tong in that deal? Do it. They want Tong? Do it. I don't care.
Like the only one that's untouchable at this point is McLean. That's it. Seriously, like with the uncertainty, that's why I brought up the uncertainty of the possible strike that's coming after next year, and the possibility of no baseball. You can't worry about 2027. There might not be a season. Like that literally might not happen. So you have to worry about 2026 and 2026 alone right now. You can't worry about that because if there is a strike, if there is a league stoppage, these guys free agency doesn't get pushed up. These contracts, they don't get paid. So people are losing free agency years. Like that's the thing that you have to worry about too. Like I would do it for 1 year of Tarik Skubal, and people would be like, "Are you freaking crazy?" Here's why I do it: because what point are you going to win? What point are you going to go and do it? Aren't we coming up on 40 years since the Mets won a World Series? Like, when are we going to stop acting like we won 2 years ago? Like, that's the problem that I don't understand with Met fans. I truly think there's too many Met fans that want to complain then win. I truly believe that. Like, it's crazy the way they talk. Like, because the same Met fans are saying, I would have made that trade for Crochet now. Yeah, but in the offseason, half of you didn't want to do it. Now you're saying it. So you see
I would say that this situation differs from Crochet because Crochet was still an unknown, let's be honest. I mean, with the amount of innings that he posted, especially as a starter, like that was we all could have maybe foreshadowed that he would have a great season like he did in a Red Sox uniform. But Skubal's proven, he's still young. He's not 26 like Garrett Crochet was. He's about 28, right? So he's pretty much in the prime of his career, if not just entering it, especially with the numbers. I mean, you could definitely say this is prime. But but the interesting part of this is that, this also, what's going to happen in the CBA, whatever the negotiations is, it's going to actually shrink. Probably, you would have to imagine, regardless of where his next contract comes from, it's going to shrink that amount anyways. But my thing is too, is like, if you make that move for Skubal, there's no way that the Mets make that move without already having that idea, that figure that he wants, and that Steve Cohen will ultimately pay him. You know how especially in New York, I mean, I see people talking about Corbin Burns with the trade with the Orioles, and yes, you can make that comparison, but like I'm just talking about media and the ridicule that this front office will get if they make this move for Skubal and it's a 1-year rental and giving up Jonah Tong, Carson Bench, and maybe even another top 10 prospect to have this guy for 1 year as a New York Met. That's the least of my concerns because I know Steve Cohen will not let that happen, regardless of what David Stearns wants to do in his negotiation tactics. I know that Steve Cohen will not make that happen. That's not my concern. That's not my concern. But is Steve Cohen and David Stearns collectively, before this type of move happens, are they on board with
correct
spending that kind of bag for a pitcher?
Correct. Well, that's the X factor. Is Steve Cohen going to step in here? Because he did it with Pete Alonso. He did it with Juan Soto. Why wouldn't he do it for a guy like this? Like if Stearns actually, wakes up and remembers there's an off season and actually make good moves, would Stearns say, "Hey, listen, I have a deal in place with the Tigers. I'm giving this guy for Skubal. Are we on board with giving him what he wants and laying down that contract and getting him signed?" Because if that can happen, now you got Nolan McLean and Tarik Skubal for the foreseeable future. Now, all that, future nonsense is set with your first two starters. Now you can mess around with a Clay Holmes. Now you can mess around with a David Peterson or whoever else you might want to bring in. If Brandon Sproat's still around, or if he's not in that deal. But let's say Jonah Tong's the last one standing. If Jonah Tong shows that he can, figure out that third pitch, and in June he's ready to go, you bring him up into this rotation. Now you're looking at something here. So that's what they really need to do. And you talked about the more like convincing one or easy one to see happen is the Freddie Peralta one. Yeah, because it's the cheapest option. That's why. That's the other problem. Like, I don't want Freddie Peralta because that's your cheapest option. Like, look, I take Freddie Peralta tomorrow over anybody in this Mets rotation other than Nolan McLean. But I don't want to get the cheapest option. Get me the best guy. Get me the best guy. If Tarik Skubal's the best guy, you get him. Stop going for the seconds and thirds, because the seconds and thirds seem to not work out as good. And again, Freddie Peralta can be great for us, but I just feel like go for the best guy. Like Freddie Peralta is still going to cost you. Why don't you go that extra step further and get Tarik Skubal? And I know Joe Ryan is there as well. I don't see. I mean, maybe Minnesota will. They get rid of a lot of players last trade deadline. Maybe they are. I guess if they like the right deal, they'll trade him. I think he's more of a like trade deadline move. But I don't see Joe Ryan getting traded this offseason. But that's another option that I would be willing to do that. Like, give me the best guy. Like, I don't want Freddie Peralta. I like Sandy Alcantara. I said it, but he was the best guy available on the market at the trade deadline, right? Skubal wasn't, Freddie Peralta wasn't, so those guys weren't really mentioned. But if I'm going to try to get Sandy Alcantara, he's going to cost pretty much, I would say similar because of his years of control. You might as well go the extra mile to get Tarik Skubal and find any way possible to, because remember, there's uncertainty with the players as well. They probably want to sign a deal before the strike happens or for the lockout, because they don't know their future either. They might get a year older and still be a free agent. So Tarik Skubal might want, and you could see him talking to the Tigers, showing his willingness to sign a contract. So he might be ready to sign an extension with the team that trades for him, because his willingness to do so now with the Tigers, and with the uncertainty of the possible strike lockout after the 26th season, the players are looking at that as well. And he probably wants to get signed and know that money's in his pocket before anything else happens, because we can have a whole different CBA and it might not look pretty for these players. So he might be looking for that contract as quickly as possible. So there might be a way where it's like a sign and trade type of deal. So would I take Skubal? Yes, Chris would take Skubal. I think most people would take Skubal. But is David Stearns thinking Skubal, or is he thinking, let's get, somebody who's 37 years old who was an ace 7 years ago and we can fix him? I'm sick of that.
Yeah. And I think that this is also a point too, where I just definitely hope that David Stearns, because this goes and this feeds off of, right? You have options, just like with the bats, you have options here for pitching, and there's different tiers of options, right? Skubal's 1A, and we're tired of the Mets going after 1C or option 2 or 3. You go get 1A. And make us shut the hell up as we come on these live streams and do these videos on a daily basis and a weekly basis. Go get 1A. And that would be Tarik Skubal. I'm just not convinced, man. And I see a lot of people talking about Hunter Green too, and I'm not sure where that's coming from, because I don't see the Reds needing to trade him this offseason, really, unless they get an astronomical return for him as well. And at that point, like, Hunter Green has had a really great past 2 seasons, but do we also really trust the injury history there? I know that he's younger than Tarik Skubal too. I know that he's probably going to be a really good pitcher moving forward, but that's a calculated risk within itself. And I don't think he hits unrestricted free agency until 3 seasons after this one anyways. Or I should say he's got 3 more years of control left, if I'm not mistaken. I think I browsed on Spotrac that that's the case. But I don't know. I don't know. Joe Ryan and Hunter Green this offseason being traded, I have to agree with you. I think it's a little bit far-fetched.
Yeah, and on top of that, I think I said it during the season when the Mets were playing the Reds, that I was listening to their broadcast, and they were talking about the Reds need to make a splash for a bat, and they were talking about Pete Alonso. So watch out for the Reds going after Pete Alonso hard. And Pete Alonso will hit 60 home runs in that ballpark. Like, no joke. Like, his pop-ups would go out of that ballpark with the way the ball flies out of that ballpark, the Great American Ballpark. So we'll see. But, again, I think the only 3 guys that are very possible for the Mets is Freddie Peralta and Alcantara. I think that's probably at the top of the list for David Stearns, because that's probably the easier options to get in regards to when Alcantara's, control still. I think Freddie Peralta has – I don't think he's going to be a free agent after this year. I think he has 1 more year after this, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I think he's a free agent.
Okay, so that might be another interesting path as well for Freddie Peralta.
Let me see. Let me double check. I actually have it pulled up. Yeah, he's got a club option for $8 million this coming season. He's a free agent in 2027.
Interesting. So you know what? Maybe Peralta isn't as easy. I mean, he might be easier to get, but again, Stearns better be in on one of these guys. There's no doubt about that. If he's not, then you know what? Sign Framber Valdez or Dylan Ceaston, right? You got options this year. You got multiple free agent targets. Not saying that I'm giving the stars and the moon to any of those guys, but if you're not going to trade these prospects, you got to spend money on these. Like it's either or. You can't have it both ways. Like in the trade sense, you got to trade prospects and spend the money to obtain them or keep them around, or you just pay guys and keep your prospects, which Stearns seems to love to do. So it's got to be something. And again, we'll definitely see when it gets closer and closer to the end of the World Series and the offseason really does kick off, and we see who opts out and what club options teams take on players and all that fun stuff as well. So now we get to my favorite guy in Pete Alonso, and of course Edwin Diaz. So I know everybody couldn't wait for that topic. But when it comes to Pete Alonso, right? I've said this, even though I'm not the biggest fan of his, and I do critique him more than others, he still is better off being a Met than I think anywhere else. I think if he goes to the Reds, he'll just die the rest of his career, in my opinion. That money is going to basically bankrupt that team. He's going to be the Lone Ranger on that team, and they're not going to spend more money after that. We've seen that with a lot of teams who, the Marlins all those years ago spent that money when they first got their new stadium in Miami, and they spent all that money, and within 2 years, they started trading everybody. I think that's going to be the case with the Reds. If they're already thinking about trading Hunter Green, you think they're going to sign him with Pete Alonso's money on the books? Probably not. So I think Pete Alonso still, in his perspective, is probably his best way for the rest of his career to be a Met. I think it suits and is better off for Pete Alonso, but I don't think it's necessarily good for the New York Mets. I don't know if that makes sense, but what I'm saying is that if you sign Pete Alonso, you're telling me this core is here for the foreseeable future and basically ending their careers together. So this core that we continue to complain about every season, throughout the season, that they show up for 2 months and go quiet for other months, that's what you're going to live with for the next 4 to 5 years while these guys are still in their prime. Chris, I don't know. I don't know anymore. I already said Alonso's not my first or second priority. He's not. But I just think the Mets need a bat. And I think it's not the worst idea to go get a big bat that can replace, or 2 bats that can replace the numbers of Alonso, where you can stretch out the lineup. I said it yesterday on my Mets Talk Live show. I'd sign Bellinger for center field and Josh Naylor for first base. They'll provide you 50 home runs combined, around 130, 120, 130 RBIs combined. That sticks right in the area of where Pete Alonso would hit RBIs and home run wise, probably more home runs and a little bit more RBIs, but you're stretching out that lineup. You're getting more hitters that are better hitters overall, and you get more power throughout the lineup instead of just one bunch of a lineup that we seem to have the problem with all year this year. So with Alonso, I don't know. I just think we need a big bat, and Diaz is kind of the obvious thing, but we'll get into that as well.
Yeah, I think Pete Alonso, there's a certain degree of like legacy talk, right? That you kind of brought up. Does he want to be a player that people remember as this premier power hitter in, on a big market team? Or does he want to go to a small market team that's going to pony up the 7 years that he wants and kind of just fade off? Because nobody's going to care about Pete Alonso, let's be real, red uniform. No disrespect to that organization. It's a factual statement, I would have to imagine. I'm not sure if he cares about that, right? With the way that he's been talking and how quick he was to say after this season ended, there was no even reflection period for Pete Alonso. He said, hey, I accepted the terms of the Mets deal. I proved myself, and they're either going to give me the contract or I'm walking to any team, no matter where it is, that is going to give me it. And do we really, I'm not saying that's his complete mindset. This is just speculation, of course, but like, if that is, I'm saying if, a big if, but if it is, do we really want a player like that anyways for 7 more years and like going into age 38, right? So that's the first thing. But there are clearly like roadblocks. There are clearly roadblocks to get this deal done with the way that David Stearns has negotiated with him in the past, and also going back to the whole philosophical kind of mindset as well that we were talking about, right? The years, right? They're the Mets. I don't think any logical team should give Pete Alonso 7 years. I think 6 is definitely a lot more reasonable, but that 7th year is just kind of like an FU on the long-term deal that he missed out on last offseason. That's why they're starting off high, because of course that's what Scott Boras does. But the other thing is I agree with people in the chat, and I was actually going to bring up this point as well, is that if you commit long term to Pete Alonso, it's because you value him as a hitter. And that's what we're talking about, right? With the big bat, if he walks, you can spread the wealth, so to speak, and get multiple players for that contract value. I do think Bellinger is also going to be up there in terms of money. So I don't really know. I can see them kind of getting paid similarly, especially if Bellinger is willing to go back and play center field on a full-time basis, because that's a little bit more of a high demand position, which is why Brandon Nimmo got his money way back when. But, if that's the case, there is something to speak for. Get a stopgap first baseman until Ryan Clifford is ready, and then, go out there and get a guy like Schwarber or Bellinger or whatever. But the other thing is that Pete Alonso has to be willing to DH, right? If not in 2026, starting in 2027, because there's nothing, right? He's great at scooping baseballs. That is the one thing that Pete Alonso fans will tell people who make it a point to bring up his egregious defense. Defensive runs saved, outs above average, the range value in Savant. It's bad. It's bad for Pete Alonso. His throws alone, right? Not even given the range, but his throws alone is laughable. And you cannot have that in the field for the next 6 years, right? At the corner. So if he's willing to be a DH, yeah, I'd pay a guy, because his bat is undeniable, Rob. I think that he's had enough years of success, maybe outside of 2024 in this league, to prove that his bat is undeniable. And it's pretty much consistent, right? Some of the clutchness is a concern, and that's where I was going to bring up Cody Bellinger's name, actually, now that we're talking about it, that Cody Bellinger with the Yankees this past season had unbelievably good clutch numbers. Runners in scoring position, 2 outs, runners in scoring position. He was good, right? He was good. And he turned out not quite as good of a year as he had in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, but still one of his better career seasons for Cody Bellinger. And I think that Cody Bellinger in general, the positional versatility, is more of a guy that's up the alley of David Stearns, whether people want to agree that that's the best fit or not. I think that is a factual statement. But yeah, with Pete Alonso, it's going to be a really interesting thing to see, not only with the Mets, but also which teams are interested in actually giving him that 7th year, if that's what it takes to pry him away from the New York Mets and David Stearns, and maybe even Steve Cohen if he decides to step in and get this deal done. Pete Alonso is not going to be taking anything less than 6 years. I would have to imagine. There's just absolutely no way with what he posted in 2025. We have to get this out of the way, Rob. We have to give credit where credit's due. Pete Alonso had a fantastic 2025 campaign.
Yep.
This team did not fail, so to speak, because of Pete Alonso. He did have a big contribution to this team, though, in the fact that this season went to shit after Kodai Senga, beat up his hamstring on that errant ball that he threw. But that's a lot to put on, Pete Alonso, and kind of blame him for that, although that was an abysmal throw, which adds on to the point of his, inconsistencies in throwing. But he had a great season in 2025. He's going to get his money, and I just don't think that the sentimental value, there's no incentive for him to take anything less. There's no incentive for him to take another, short-term deal, anything less than 6 years, because this is his last chance. Last year wasn't his last chance. He knew that this year, signing that contract, the opt-outs, this was going to be his last chance at the long-term deal. And so whether it's 5 years, 6 years, the highest amount of years with the respectable AAV to maximize his career earnings, because these guys are players at the end of the day, they're humans. They want to maximize their earnings potential when they're in the league, and they have every right to do that. I just don't see him taking anything less than that long-term deal of 5, 6, 7 years. So it's going to be a bidding war, and that's what scares me the most, and that's what makes this the most uncertain time ever of Pete Alonso and the Met long term, because this is going to be last year. Opposing teams are actually still scared, as well as the New York Mets, to give him that long-term deal, right? They were scared to do so because he was coming off of an abysmal 2024. I think there's some team out there that will give him that long-term deal this offseason. And the first chance, right? If he fields offers and if he's going to take the best offer, I think that's just how it's going to play out. So, but like you said, there are other options, right? There's Schwarber, there's Bellinger, there's going to be Alex Bregman too. We haven't even talked about Alex Bregman just yet.
Yep.
And shifting the positions around. Ryan Clifford's coming up. There's stopgap options. I know nobody probably wants, I think this is, you might laugh, but like a reunion with Wilmer Flores on a short-term deal. I don't know, for a stopgap first base. He just hit 20 home runs. He can play first base. I know he only did so 16 times, but he's got better metrics defensively than Pete Alonso, at least in terms of the defensive run saved category, which is crazy to think about. Josh Naylor's also probably going to be in the ballpark of a 3-year, $46 million deal, somewhere around there. That's a pretty good contract given what he posted this season. There are options. And the one thing that we have to get out of the way of the Mets fans talking about this situation, and I already know people are going to say no to Wilmer Flores, but like, he didn't pose bad numbers, and you're giving him let's say you give him a 1-year deal. Like, is anyone really going to complain until Ryan Clifford's ready? I wouldn't complain. Anyways, I know that's maybe a crazy take on my part, but there's options, and I just don't want Mets fans to just think that there isn't. And that's the biggest thing here, Rob. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. And I think there's more options this year than it was last year. And I think that's where Met fans are kind of like ready to jump off the edge if the Mets didn't get Pete Alonso, because it seemed like there was nobody else. And now, you brought up Josh Naylor. I wanted him at the trade deadline. I wanted to put his ass at DH because he hits. He's a good hitter. You see what he's played very well in the playoffs as well. And he's a way better first baseman than Pete Alonso. Even if you got a DH Pete Alonso to play, during the season last year and play Josh Naylor at first base, do it. And those guys are good players. Like, we're so focused on the superstar when we just need solid, good players. You know how bad our 6-9 was this year, where there was basically no contest. Like, if the 1 through 5 didn't hit, we weren't winning, because most teams need their top guys to perform, which is fine. But even our 5th guy, our 4th guy weren't doing the job. And that was where you needed a little bit more. You need a little bit of clutch players. You brought up Bellinger when it comes to his clutch numbers. Those type of guys matter in September. Do you know how bad Pete Alonso was? He was okay offensively. You know how bad he was defensively in September? His worst defensive numbers were in the month of September. Couldn't throw balls anywhere. Couldn't even flip a ball to first base. Nearly knocking Brazaban on his ass. And we've seen that like too many times. His indecisiveness of throwing the ball to turn a double play. That is what we just see too much from Pete Alonso. We need good players. And Pete Alonso has great numbers offensively. He had a great year this year offensively. But even that, and Pete Alonso wasn't to blame necessarily for this year with his offensive side. But he's been a part of this losing again and again and again. How many more choke jobs do you need? How many more losing seasons do you need? How many more missed postseasons do you need until you have to realize that there's got to be change? And unfortunately, Pete Alonso didn't sign that extension a couple of years ago when the Mets offered him a 7-year deal. He didn't take it. So that's on him. He made this situation happen. The Mets offered him a 7-year deal a couple of years ago, and he spit on that and is leading to the last 2 seasons of him being free agent. That's on him. So stop blaming the Mets for Pete Alonso's decisions. And there's options out there that are better defensively, not better bad, but better defensively, and they're still good bats. And it makes you be able to get somebody else to help your team in this lineup and defensively, because right away you get Josh Naylor, you get Cody Bellinger, that run prevention nonsense that Stearns always talks about looks a hell of a lot better. You got a master in center field in Cody Bellinger that can also play left field, right field, and first base if need be. He's an awesome defender. That helps with the corners. When it comes to Juan Soto and the broken down Brandon Nimmo, it helps because he can go gap to gap with no problem. I know some people are saying, oh, do we need another lefty in the lineup? I'm sick and tired of lefty-righty stuff. I really am. Because our left-handed batters this year hit better against lefties more often than they hit against righties. Every time we talked about it, when Mendoza decided to all of a sudden do matchups, he was putting right-handed hitters who weren't hitting lefties for the lefties that were sitting on the bench that were hitting lefties. So I don't care about matchups anymore. Give me the better player. It's just that simple, Chris. And, we can throw Diaz in this conversation since it's part of the topic. Diaz is a no-brainer. We feel like he's going to opt out. Maybe he won't. If he does, I think the Mets are going to retain him. I don't think there's any way David Stearns is stupid enough to let him go. You have to, unfortunately, pay him. It might be an overpay when it comes to years, but it is what it is. You can't let that guy go. You just can't, unfortunately.
No, you can't. I mean, if Diaz is not in a Mets uniform in 2026, there's big problems there. But you know what? It's just night and day different with the way that he came out and addressed the situation about potentially opting out versus the way that Pete Alonso did. And that's like a core difference within itself right there.
Yeah.
And Edwin Diaz is the same situation. What was that?
I think Pete knows he's gone, and that's why he said that.
And that could be the case too, but it's like these two guys, this is probably both of their last chances to get any sort of long-term deal done with anybody. And Edwin Diaz is talking about how great this Mets organization is and how much he'd like to stay, and he doesn't really know if he's going to opt out, and he has to weigh his decisions, etc. And Pete Alonso's just like, I'm opting out. I mean, and so I can't blame Pete Alonso.
No.
Like, he went through this already before, and Edwin Diaz already got a big contract at the Mets, so it's kind of different in that regard. But still, from like an optics level perspective, it's just 9 day different. And given the uncertainties, because there are many uncertainties with this bullpen, as we talked about a little bit at the top of this stream, there's just no way the Mets can afford not to have Edwin Diaz back, regardless of what the deal looks like, whether it's the current deal or a brand new deal. He is, people can argue he's the best closer in baseball. I think numbers can prove that, but at the bare minimum, he's a top 3 closer in baseball. And when you have so much uncertainty in the front end of your bullpen, guys that are free agents or, injuries like Reed Garrett, etc. The last thing that you need is uncertainty in the back end. And that's where you need to shore things up. And so I still think bullpens there are guys that you go out there and you spend the money on and you do that. But we're talking about, setup guys and 6th, 7th inning guys. And in the case of the New York Mets, 5th inning guys, you don't really spend big money there. You just don't, not historically speaking. So yeah, I don't know. I just don't think there's any way the Mets, given the position that they're in, especially, given what Helsley did too, because he's going to be a free agent, especially what Helsley did in the second half in the Mets uniform, you can't afford not to have Edwin Diaz back there. So I agree with you. There's not really much to talk about with Edwin Diaz, and it's good at least that Edwin Diaz didn't take the Pete Alonso approach to how he was talking about the contract. So that is the one thing that is in our favor right now is Edwin Diaz in this offseason.
Yeah, and if David Stearns is smart to get Met fans on his side, he should sign Ryan Helsley over Diaz and see how that turns out for Met fans, getting everybody excited for our closer for 2026. But you talked about options, right? The Mets have many options at first base. Well, there's 2 Japanese big boy power hitters in Murakami and Okamoto that are going to be posted. And these guys are big power hitters. These guys got a tremendous bat. They both play first base. Murakami is not as good defensively as Okamoto. Okamoto is a Gold Glover, and he hits for power. And, they're both at a decent age where, a lot of teams, and they're not going to cost a ton of money. there's other options. And, you know, I heard that the reports are the Mets are more favored towards Okamoto. They like him better because of his defensive prowess along with his bat. Murakami seems like he's destined for the West Coast or the Yankees. And he said that, actually. So I don't think the Mets have any chance for Murakami unless they, you know, I'm not sure how the posting works with pay-wise and years. I'm not sure how, because the Japanese posting is weird. You know, some players, you know, have small deals because of they were too young, and some can get massive deals. So I think to watch out for Okamoto, a guy who is good defensively, Gold Glover at first base, and a guy who can hit for power. Again, you never know how these guys. Usually, the bats perform better than the pitchers most times. Obviously, the Mets got the worst of the Japanese pitchers, considering that Kodai Senga is kind of the runt of the litter. There is another Japanese pitcher that's going to be posted. I forgot his name, but he's supposed to be good. He had like an under 2 ERA. He threw like 160 something pitches, 160 something innings last year. He's a really good pitcher, but I don't know if the Mets are going to go that Japanese pitcher route again. He's not Donato. He's not Otani. He's not even Imanaga. So it's going to be very interesting. But what are your thoughts about Murakami? Because that was the first guy we heard of during the season that Stearns went out there to see him. Little did we know he was out there to also see Okamoto as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, I see this article. I have it pulled up right now. Okamoto would be great, but there's a report saying that he's probably not going to be posted by the Giants, his team in Japan right now. So I mean, there's not really much the Mets can do there. I would probably take him too, honestly. I'm surprised that he hasn't even been getting more hype. I'm taking a look at the Baseball Reference page. I mean, you're talking about 7 of his last 8 seasons with 30 plus home runs. That's insanity. And you know, Murakami's getting more hype here, maybe because I guess the expectation was that Okamoto wasn't going to be posted after all. He's 29 years old. He's one of the best hitters in the Japanese league as well. I don't know. It's interesting, but I don't. Yeah, with the Murakami situation, if Okamoto doesn't get posted, like these recent reports as of today are saying, I mean, Murakami, also don't get your hopes up for him either. He's told you straight up that it's the Yankees or the West Coast. So that's really all that needs to be said there, directly from the source. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, but Okamoto, I mean, it sucks that he won't get posted if these reports are correct, but maybe there's a potential for next season, which is where a stopgap comes in. I know nobody wants to go that route, but you know, that's fine. There's options. There's still other options. Listen, man, you know, if it all depends too. I think that this situation is very much influenced by, it has to be, the Mets' belief in Ryan Clifford. And the fact that they actually promoted him to AAA when they did was kind of shocking to me, but maybe an indication that they are ready to take a chance on him if they go out there and go maybe like the Bregman route, right? And kind of shift around the defense there. My thing is that when you're talking about Clifford, when you're talking about Vientos, right, it's the unprovenness to me. You know what I mean? I'm all for giving the young kids a chance and some sort of capacity, but to rely on him as an everyday player out of the gates in 2026 when you have championship caliber expectations is a little bit far-fetched for me. And with Vientos too, I don't trust Vientos every day. I don't think anybody should. I don't even think Vientos it might even be here 2026. I think that his name is on the trade block. And so, you know, it's going to be interesting in that regard, but I guess we'll hear soon of this great Mets farm system and all these offensive numbers that these guys were posting, from Jet Williams to Clifford to Carson Bench, how much of regular contributors David Stearns really views them in the goings of the season. Because you're talking about center field with Bellinger. I mean, you've got Benj in center field waiting. He's, rising through the ranks. Do they trust in him or do they not? And that's something that we have to establish too, if you're David Stearns.
That's another reason why they gotta figure out these prospects and figure out the pitching very soon with a trade, because then you know what you have in your farm system after that trade, right? If Benj is still here after you trade for one of your top starters, now you can have a conversation. All right, we don't need Bellinger. Maybe we'll give Benj the opportunity, or Williams the opportunity, or whoever's left. That's still a possibility for center field. That's the thing, right? And with Stearns' plan, we don't have any idea what Stearns' plan is. That's the most frustrating part, Chris. And you're right, what you were saying. Like, are they going to give? I'm all for giving young kids chances, but play them. Like, stop not trading him and stop leaving him in the minors or keeping him on the bench. You can't have every situation and think it's going to be okay. You got to pick it. The indecisiveness of David Stearns is why the Mets fell apart last year. His indecisiveness of trading anybody at the deadline, keeping the same roster construction for this lineup didn't help at all. It made it worse. You failed in the trade deadline with the bullpen. You didn't do anything for the starting pitching at the trade deadline. Like, you got to be decisive at some point. Look, I don't care. Look, of course I want him to make a decision and get it right, but I want him to make a decision, whatever it is. If you're going to tell me you're going to use all the young kids as our starters, do it. Don't wait. If you're going to trade for a starter, do it. But be decisive. I'd rather you be decisive and worry about the consequences or the results later, because I'm not gonna kill a GM or a president of baseball ops if he was decisive in what he wanted to do. How many times have David Stearns kind of sound like he's saying one thing and doing another? That's basically what he's done since he's been the Mets president of baseball ops. He says one thing or does another, and we're kind of in flux. So I have no idea what his plan is, except that he better make this team better, and they better be a playoff team, or his ass will be on the hot seat right after Mendoza gets canned in 2026.
I just hope that the reports of Steve Cohen being as pissed off as, all these reports are saying are actually true, because that's when accountability actually starts, right? And it just seems like Steve Cohen has been taking the back seat, to David Stearns and letting this all come to fruition and whatever the plan has been. I hope he's asking more questions. I'm not saying he has to overstep David Stearns, and it's still right. I mean, I guess year 2 in this overall plan under Stearns, but there better be more questions being asked from the guy that's actually dishing out the money to field this team, this very expensive team that just missed the playoffs after signing the biggest free agent on the market. So, yeah, and the plan has to include 1A players, Rob. I think that's something that we're going to be talking about all off season, and that, yeah, we will talk about. You will come to these streams and our channels, and we will talk about, options and these stopgaps. Like, nobody really wants to see a stopgap first baseman. You know what I mean? No, it's not really exciting, but if that's the overall plan, then that's the overall plan. And that just seems like a little bit more what's up the alley of David Stearns and the overall philosophy. But I think that to show us fans, that they are serious about righting the wrongs of 2025, go get 1A players. Model yourself in the philosophy after the Dodgers. They do not care. They do not care. And I really do think, and I'm not saying be reckless with the money you spend and the prospects that you trade. There should be a method to the madness, but I think aggression is something that we have not seen from David Stearns. He's been timid. Let's be honest. He's been timid. Some of that is a fault of his very own, and he needs to take accountability for it. And some of it is still trying to get this roster that he was handed out of the gutter. And I think that a lot of people lost sight because the Mets overachieved expectations in 2024. And if they hadn't, the expectation definitely would have been playoffs in 2025, 100%. But I don't think we would have been as upset overall by missing the playoffs in 2025 if 2024 wasn't an NLCS appearance in year 1 of David Stearns. So I'm giving him some slack, but that's up until this point. Now he's got no more excuses. The timidness is not going to play over well and go over well here in New York, right? That's not going to go over well with this fan base. I'm sure it's not going to go over well with Steve Cohen if the results keep being the same. So aggression and willingness to part ways with prospects in a smart manner. If he parted ways with Brandon Sproat and Jet Williams for Garrett Crochet last offseason, and he was aggressive in doing so to get him out of the Red Sox hands, guess what? We'd be looking back at that trade and applauding him.
Yep.
Regardless of whatever the end result would have been of the Mets season in 2025. And they probably would have even made a playoff push having that ace at the top of their rotation when they desperately needed it in 2025.
Yeah.
But, I guess hindsight's always 2020. Looking in the rearview mirror is something that unfortunately we have to do, because this cannot keep being a pattern with David Stearns. I think that's the most important thing to set the expectation of early in this offseason before we finally see some moves come in. And I'm just going to say the winter meetings and these streams, they're going to be interesting. They're going to be fun. It's going to be like the Juan Soto watch parties that we had all last offseason, but in a different manner where this team needs to get better in a lot of aspects of this team.
Yep. And listen, you just hope that this season, as bad as it was, as a disaster as it was, is that this whole organization is mad. And that anger is pushed towards making big moves, getting this team where it needs to be. Don't talk about being the Dodgers anymore and you're making small-time moves. The Dodgers aren't signing Frankie Montas. The Dodgers aren't signing Griffin Cannon or Clay Holmes or Sean Manaea. They're just not. Start making the big moves like you said you want to be like the East Coast Dodgers. Let's finally see that. Let's be the big boys. And you know what? Now is the best time. The NL East is very much up for grabs. The Phillies have a ton of free agents. They're in flux. They're getting older. The Braves really don't have a pitching staff. They got their lineup, but they don't have a pitching staff. This is the best time. Nationals are still in that influx mode, but I think they're going to start spending money very soon with their young players, stepping up. So this is the time for the Mets to take control of the NL East. This is their time. So, Chris, with that said, episode 1 in the books, and he got one more to go. Let's go. What's up?
Oh, no. I was just saying episode 1 in the book. Oh, but I was going to say, too, as it relates to the Marlins, they're also getting better, too. And if they start spending some, they've got a really well-established kind of core there, especially with, if they keep Sandy, with him and Edward Cabrera. I don't know. They got something cooking up, too. So the top dogs of the NL East, definitely, there's some shakiness there with the Braves, the Mets, and the Phillies going into the offseason. And I think that kind of balances out with some of these younger teams like the Nationals and the Marlins really trying to turn their organization around. They're not quite there yet, I would say, and I think their own fan base would say that, but they're definitely going to be there very, very soon.
There you go, guys. So episode 1 of Mets Hot Stove is in the books. Obviously, there's many, 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 many more to come, and it's not even technically the offseason officially for Major League Baseball yet. Thank you guys for watching Mets Hot Stove episode 1. We will see you next time at a future date. We'll post that date a little bit later, but check out for our videos, our live streams. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, guys. We'll see you next time. Have a great night. And as always, Met fans, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your